Hello everyone and welcome back to the Biology and Health Bloom Institute summer course for middle school. Today is class 2 for animals. So let's get started. So your warm-up is to try to recall the different parts of a plant cell and write them down in your notebooks. If you don't remember right now, that's completely fine. You can go to the previous slideshow if you have access, or you can go to the previous lesson video if you have access and see the different parts of a plant cell which we discussed in the last class. And you can pause the video to do that, obviously, and write it down. Because the more you study these parts of a plant cell, that will help you a lot in your middle school and high school biology, because trust me, coming from experience, we had to memorize these parts and their functions. And you'll need these parts also in future lessons. And here are the parts of an animal cell. So you can just jot this down just to memorize the shape of an animal cell, but I would just recommend writing down the mitochondria and the nucleus, which are two really important parts of this animal cell. So the mitochondria is responsible for cellular respiration, which creates life energy. We'll learn all about that later. And the nucleus has genetic information. So here are more parts of an animal cell. So the rough endoplasmic reticulum is used for protein synthesis, and it's usually close or bound to ribosomes. And the SER is used for lipid synthesis, detoxification of drugs and poison, especially in the liver. So you can see how important this is. Like, imagine having poison inside your liver. So the SER is really important for detoxifying that. And the Golgi apparatus chemically modifies the products received from the ERs, which are proteins and lipids, and then packages them before sending them to destinations in or out of the cell. So we won't really cover a lot about these parts, but they're pretty helpful if you want to go further into biology. So I would recommend writing them. You don't have to memorize these at all. So if you have a friend near you, or you can just use your notebook, what do you know about natural selection? Either discuss with a friend or write it down in your notebook, because we're about to get into something called natural selection, and it's really important in biology. And coming from experience again, I have done a lot of practice on natural selection, and if you get a head start on this, it's really beneficial. So natural selection is basically when individuals in a population have variations or differences in their inherited traits. These trait variations are due to differences in an individual's genes. Some organisms have advantageous traits which allow them to avoid predators and reproduce, and some have disadvantageous traits which make the organism more likely to be seen by predators or less attractive to mates. So here you can see the word advantageous has the word advantage in it. So advantageous traits are good and it allows them to hide from predators, and disadvantageous traits have the word disadvantage in them, and obviously they're bad, and they're more likely to be seen by predators or less attractive to mates. So natural selection is the mechanism of evolution that states that organisms better suited for their environment will be more likely to survive in nature. Please write this sentence down. The second paragraph, the whole sentence. And thus nature selects them to survive better. Here, hence given the word natural selection, nature is selecting the organisms with better traits to survive better in the populations and environment. So here's how biological fitness relates to natural selection. The ability for organisms to survive and reproduce is called biological fitness. Organisms with advantageous traits are likely to have more offspring. These offspring inherit their parents' advantageous traits, and as a result, the advantageous traits become more popular or common in the population over multiple generations. This process is another example of natural selection, because these organisms which are most fit to survive in the environment will have more and more offspring, and thus those offspring are taking up a larger space in the population and thus making a higher percentage of what makes up that population. Because the organisms that have disadvantageous traits are likely to have fewer offspring, because the disadvantageous trait offspring either died or were not able to mate, and thus if you died, can you have children? No. So obviously you won't have a high percentage of your genetic variation within a population, or your gene type in a population, right? So those that makes the disadvantageous traits to become less common in the population, and those alleles, or like the version of the gene that the organism with the disadvantageous trait has, is really like making it get caught by predators, or it's not advantage, it doesn't attract mates, which we'll learn about later. And thus these organisms are least fit to survive in the environment. So does it have a high or low biological fitness? Yes, it has a low biological fitness if you have a disadvantageous trait. And I would recommend writing down the first paragraph and the second paragraph, but you can just shorten it. So just say how organisms with disadvantageous traits are likely to have fewer offspring, and organisms with advantageous traits are likely to have more offspring. So here we have our cute tiger here, and this is all about blending in with the environment. So pretend this tiger is like the predator, right? Like it's the op, like it's going to kill anything that gets in its way, and it's going to try to search for prey. And both these antelopes or deer are prey for it, right? So the one that is in a green, like it's in a really bright green forest and it has a black fur color. So that fur color stands out really easily, the one on the left, right? Like you can easily see a black antelope or deer in the middle of a light green like pastel forest. So that means it's easily seen by the predator, which obviously shortens the organism's lifespan, aka the organism has a higher chance of dying when hunted by the tiger. So we'll give it a 20% rate of survival, right? And then the beige deer that blends in so well with the color of the hay, hides better, and is able to reproduce and create way more offspring that have the same fur color. And because it's creating more offspring with the same fur color, they'll become a more higher percentage in the population because they're successful, right? And it has a 80% rate of survival because it blends in with the environment and the tiger can't catch it, right? So the tiger is going to do the thing that takes the least effort for it, right? So it obviously doesn't need a lot of hard work to see a really dark deer in the middle of a light green forest, but it takes a lot of hard work and intuition to find a yellow or beige colored deer in the middle of stacks of hay in the middle of the savannah or whatever, right? So obviously you can see the rates of survival of each organism. And I would recommend at least like making a few sentences in your notebook about this because it's super important, not just in biology but ecology, and you'll learn a lot more about that coming soon. So here are the different types of selections. So there are multiple types of selections that aren't just natural selection. So there's artificial selection, which humans select for or against a specific feature in an organism. For example, the domestication from wolves to dogs, which we will talk about later. So humans are selecting something manually, and it's not like natural, it's like man-made kind of selection. It's similar to like GMOs, but yeah, that's artificial selection. And then sexual selection is when mating partners choose which members to mate with. For example, the color of a peacock's feathers, which attracts mate. So male peacocks, which have a wider range of like feathers and larger area of the feathers with more colors, easily attracts the female peacocks rather than someone who has like gray feathers which look really ugly. So you can obviously tell that. And then two mates compete with members to get access to mating partners. For example, a ram with really large horns versus a ram that like has really short horns fight for one mate. Obviously the ram with the larger horn will like it will actually knock out the other ram because it's way more powerful and has a lot more power with those horns, and that can easily like bash against the other ram. Thus it will win. And then when it mates with the female ram, then in the baby, the trait of the long horns on the ram will be much more prevalent in the population, because large horns on rams is a beneficial trait that can help win organisms after mating, win organisms after a mating fight with other competitors. I'm sure you can understand this. And like after the baby has large horns, these same mating competitions will happen again and again, and then the percentage of rams with large horns will go up. So that's why you see large horns ram today, right? You don't see a ram with like a super short horn. So you can write that down, and I'm sure you're getting the idea. Yeah. So here's the vocabulary for evolution. This is super important. I struggled a little bit with this one, but if you memorize this, it's really easy, and you have to understand it too, of course. So an organism is an individual living thing. Like literally, I am an organism. That's an individual living thing. And then a species is a group of organisms capable of breeding fertile offspring with one another. So like humans are a species. They can breed fertile offspring with one another. And like fertile offspring means like healthy children, okay? Like species is something that can breed healthy children with one another. And then a population is a group of individuals that belong to the same species and plus live in the same area. So my species obviously is human, Homo sapiens, but I am not in the same population as someone in like Japan because I don't live in the same area. So, but if I lived there, like if I lived in Japan, then I would probably be in the same population. And not even just in Japan, maybe in a specific city. Like if I lived in Osaka, then I would be in the population of those people. Like your neighborhood is kind of like a small population, right? And then the speciation is a creation of a new species. So when paths diverge basically, and organisms become so different from each other that the species splits apart, and these two species cannot breed with each other and makes fertile offspring. Basically, I think this has to also do with going from wolves to dogs. So dogs can't really breed that many fertile offspring with wolves, for example. And same with orangutans and different monkeys to humans. This is speciation. Like humans cannot have fertile offspring with an orangutan, as you know, and that is the creation of a new species. So here is the basics of evolution for animals. So evolution is the process where heritable traits in a group of organisms change over many generations, and this process is made possible by genetic variation. And this variation, often resulting from reproduction, leads to a range of traits within a population. Over time, small, tiny differences between organisms in a population can accumulate, leading to the evolution of a new species. For example, when there was a mutation and in like different species of monkeys that had no tails, and then eventually they wanted to live on land in the savannah rather than in the trees. Many years later, there came Homo sapiens, which are humans, which don't live on trees, but monkeys still live on trees, right? So that's a speciation. Like it's the creation of a new species depending on the area that their population desires to live in, and adapts to their environment for that through genetic mutations, etc. So again, evolution happens in populations and not single organisms. So it cannot happen to one person. Like one monkey cannot lose its tail and then become a human, right? So evolution happens like because a population wants to move somewhere, and it just doesn't happen in one single organism. So, and it happens over many years, and it happens because of a mutation that is beneficial to the environment. So let's go deeper in detail to see how this evolution works. So over time, preferred traits have become more common in populations, right? So alongside this comes genetic mutations, preferred breeding, natural selection, genetic drift, and gene flow. Previous evolutionary species will not necessarily go extinct. Evolution does not deteriorate ancestry, but creates a pathway to a more beneficial species for the environment they are living in. So evolution is nothing but animals having genetic mutations that can be beneficial, that help you blend in with your environment, right? So for example, the domestication of wolves to dogs. So originally there were a lot of wolves, and some of those wolves wanted to be more friendlier and they wanted to be kept as farm animals, and eventually through random mutations, then they eventually became dogs, which had floppier ears, less sharper teeth, and had a less aggressive outlook on life. So they became dogs and friendlier with humans, right? So today we have like really nice and friendly dogs, but we also have wolves that can hunt and kill. So it's not a deterioration of the ancestry, right? So as you can see in this chart, alligators evolved from lampreys, and they also evolved from antelopes and all, right? The antelope is ancestor of the alligator, but just because alligators are living today does not mean that bald eagles, antelopes, sea bass, and lampreys are all gone and extinct. It's just when a population is moving from an area to an area, then the features in it will change, or because of a random mutation, the features will change. And because of the mutation, and if it was beneficial, that means the feature will stick with the organism and the future generations to come. So I hope you can understand this, and you can see in the chart it shows that features were gained depending on where the organism wanted to move, right? So if there's an antelope, and then there was a lot of evolution between those things, and there was an ancestor between the bald eagle and the alligator, it got feathers and had a lot more evolutions and genetic mutations and became the bald eagle. But without feathers and without those other genetic mutations, it became the alligator. So one generation wanted to go near swamps, and one generation wanted to go near the aerial areas, and eventually became a bald eagle. So let me show you the next slide. So here are the mechanisms of evolution. So gene flow is the movement of organisms with certain genetic material in and out of a population. For example, migration. So there's a really good example of this. So if there are specific birds living in an island, and a different bird comes into the island, for example, a bald eagle comes into an island that's full of peacocks, then that's a migration, right? And then that's moving in a new genetic material into something that had an original amount of genetic material. So that's why it's called gene flow, because genetic material is flowing from one place to another. And this is specific to only locations and populations. And then mutation is when a really random positive genetic mutation will become more prevalent in a population. Because sometimes genetic mutations can be really bad, and sometimes genetic mutations can be really good and can help uplift the society, uplift the population for the future generations and really make it much better to suit it in its environment. And that's because of natural selection, because individuals with beneficial traits from hiding from predators will be more common in percentage of a population. E.g., they are naturally selected to survive and they blend in with their environment. And then genetic drift is random chance events that alter the genetic frequency of traits, usually in small populations, since chance events are not far and wide. Like, it's not the whole world exploding. It's just like a tree falls on a tiger swamp, killing random tigers, and it's not targeted like natural selection. It is not like targeting a specific feature of a gene. It's just really random. Like, it's not, oh, like this tree is only going to kill tigers that have yellow stripes. It's just random. Like, it's another thing, just like mutation, which are two random things. And then the last one is selective mating. So organisms with preferred traits for partners will reproduce more with organisms with similar traits. So for example, colorful feathers on male peacocks to impress the female peacocks. Like, if the male peacock is like gray and has like really ugly feathers, then it's not going to stand out towards the mates and it will not have a successful life. And that trait is probably going to go down in the population because they did not get to reproduce. And because they did not reproduce, the percentage of that allele or gene in the population did not go high. So thank you again for attending this class. We will see you in class 3. If you have any questions or doubts, you can go back in the slideshow and review the slides. And I hope I clarified everything for you. Thank you so much again, and see you again.